Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Opapari, and this is the Songwriters on Process podcast. Since 2010, I've been interviewing songwriters about their writing process. And on this podcast, we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process, far deeper than the usual. Do you start with the lyrics or the music question? By way of background, I have a PhD in English literature, and I'm a prose writer myself. I'm not a songwriter. In fact, I've never written a song in my life. But my goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers and poets, just as writers, plain and simple, and have always been interested in the writing process. This is an intelligent conversation between two writers. And on this podcast, like I said, we go deep into the process. We talk about rituals, the seeds of inspiration, the role of movement on the process, writer's block, the revision process, pens, pencils, types of paper, and of course, we talk about books. You can find all the archived interviews on the Songwriters on Podcast website and across all streaming platforms. And with that, let's dive into this week's episode. And today on the podcast, it's Mike Einziger of Incubus. Incubus has been around. Einziger is the guitarist and songwriter, one of the songwriters in the band. And he's collaborated and co-written with other people outside of the band. But I did not realize Incubus has sold 23 million albums since they got their start in the 90s, which is just unfathomable in today's industry. 23 million albums. So I always listen for pull quotes, those quotes that really stand out in interviews that really make me think. And he said something that I wrote down that really is one of my favorites. And he said, bravery is underrated when it comes to art. Bravery is underrated when it comes to art. And, we talked about this in the context of don't be afraid to write the bad stuff. Don't worry about getting the perfect stuff down. Just create, be brave. And I love that idea of just not being afraid to write anything, no matter how bad it is. Listen, I had to bring my A game for this one. Einziger is a deeply thoughtful, introspective person with a background in the physical sciences and physics. I mean, he's co-founded a wireless tech firm. He's co-founded a biotech startup. So he has that science background that he brings to songwriting. And so that's what made this topic, this discussion so interesting. So anyway, I enjoyed this a lot. Here it is, my interview with Mike Einziger of Incubus. All right, let's have at it. So, do you like to create every day? Do you feel like it's important to create every day, no matter how bad it is? I mean, songwriters tend to fall into two camps. And prose writers will tell you, butt in the seat, regardless of how bad it is. But I find that songwriters tend to kind of shy away from that and feel like sometimes they feel like if it's you create every day, things might be too derivative. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think for me, the creative process has always been just sort of about a feeling of being driven by curiosity to some end. And that comes and goes in waves. It's not like a constant thing where I hate to say this, that does not involve discipline, because it does involve discipline. You have to discipline yourself to be able to do the work. But I guess when it's being driven by such a natural form of curiosity, it doesn't really feel like work. So, I guess the things that I've been most disciplined about in my life have been things that I've become sort of obsessed with, and things that people would really have to stop me from doing versus like somebody telling me I had to do it. So it's like, once I get on an idea and I'm like really on it, it's like someone's got to tell me like, hey, put that away, go to bed, but it's 5 o'clock in the morning. You've been working on this all day. I have a very sort of obsession driven approach to everything, really, whether it's artistic or otherwise. I don't really make much of a distinction, to be honest, between what would consider creative, or what one might consider like a creative endeavor, or like just simply building something, because it's all kind of the same thing to me. Like in my just the way my brain computes it, it's like it's an assemblage of some sort where you're trying to put pieces of things um in the place that they need to go, and once you get them there, then it might feel like it's done. Does that make any sense?
It does. I guess, so if you don't necessarily write music, I guess, every day.
No, I definitely don't. I actually
Okay.
go long periods of time where I don't write music at all.
Deliberately, is that like, do you do that? Because some people say, like, I mean, I know for me, I feel like deliberately taking a break helps me become more fresh later on. Other people feel like if they take that long of a break, that's when anxiety like starts to come in, like, why is this not
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah, I don't really know how to define that for myself. It's kind of like, the thing that seems to have been working for me in my life, prior to, you know, having commercial success with Incubus, was always driven that way. Like there wasn't so much structure to it, and that really never changed. I think that's why maybe you've seen sort of the idiosyncratic um presentation of what our band is because, for better or worse, like that's just the way the process has always been. Brandon has his own sort of way of looking at things and doing things and writing things. I think he's more disciplined about certain aspects in the traditional sense than I am, but we make it happen. At the end of the day, that's what's got to happen. We got to make songs and finish them. I think the hardest thing to do, probably as an artist, is know when something's done. Like um, I say that in the sense that I don't think that's ever been hard for me, but I've heard that a lot. So, and that makes a lot of sense. I can relate to it, but like I don't really have a problem ever determining like when a song's done. Like when it feels done, it feels done.
So I get that question as a prose writer. How do you know? And I feel like as a writer, my perspective is, how do I know when to stop the revision process? You can revise over and over. And when I was a professor, I'd get that question from my students. And the best answer I could come up with was, if I don't make this change, would anyone notice? Yeah, that's the best I can come up with. Because if you don't, like when I was writing my dissertation, at some point I'd say, I've got to set this aside. And that was the best I could come up with, was, if I don't make this change, is that going to, and when Mark and I wrote the book, it was the same thing. I felt like I could have read those chapters over and over, but eventually it was, no one's going to notice if I don't make this change. And that's the best I could come up with.
Yeah, I guess in theory, for me, um, I just maybe either got sick of working on it and felt like it was finished, or just like felt like it was time to move on, for whatever reason, regardless of what other people would think about it. There are obviously like different ways you can do things. And over the years, we've had, disagreements about like, well, it should end in this way or end in that way. But I don't know, it's just never been a really a thing for us. Like we've always just finished our projects once we've started them, our songs, our music, our artwork, whatever it is. Like it's like, okay, that's done. Like time to move on. Because I think that actually one of the things that pushes you, um, this is me just sort of opining on this subject, but I think one of the things that pushes you to keep evolving as an artist is to continually move. So if you get stuck, which really can happen, with these decisions. Like, oh, I don't know if this is over. Like I know people that spent years like toiling over, some mundane or some whatever ending of a song, and like nobody ever heard it. So it's like, all right, great. Are you happy that no one ever heard of it because you just couldn't decide how to end it? I don't know. I think of it in these more black and white terms, I guess.
I interviewed Anthony Doerr, the author. He wrote All the Light We Cannot See, which won the Pulitzer Prize. And um, talked about writer's block. And I asked him if he believed in writer's block. And he said no. He thinks writer's block, he calls it a failure of courage. And I love that idea. What he meant by that is you can't be afraid to write the bad shit. I mean, we all have stuff inside of us, but writer's block happens, for me, it happens often. It's not because we don't know what to say, it's because we don't know where to begin.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's kind of like, failure to, or like we're being worried about writing the bad shit. It's kind of also like at the same time, like everything you write can't always be like amazing
Right.
unless you're some, you know, I'll only speak for myself in that regard. Like, sometimes I come up with good ideas and sometimes I don't. And I don't think it necessarily has to do with fear. I just have this I've just always had this feeling like that if a piece of music or art or whatever it is like ends up making me feel happy, like my experience has been that it makes other people feel happy. So like, it's not really about like, oh, well, I'm not sure if this makes me happy or not, so I don't want it to come out, or I'm worried maybe this will make me happy, but sometimes like, for the first time in my experience, like other people don't like it, but I think it's cool. So I haven't really like experienced too much of that, and that might just be a lucky thing. Uh, I just feel like an innate sense of joy in making the music, writing the music, recording it, whatever you want to, whatever piece of the process. And if at the end of it, I feel like sort of like joyful about it, like I just like sharing it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I remember
But
reading a story.
bravery, sorry, back to your point about
Yeah.
bravery though.
Yeah.
Like bravery is very underrated when it comes to art. Like you really have to be brave. Like there's just no question about it. Like, I get asked all the time, like what should I be most focused on if I'm a young artist, I'm an aspiring artist, whatever. It's like you have to be brave. You're gonna get criticized. People are gonna tell you you suck and that stuff you're doing is a waste of time. And it's like you literally have to just be like, fuck all that. Like, who cares? Like, that's not why you do it, and if you are doing it for that purpose, then maybe it doesn't work. I don't know. I've never done it for any other purpose, so like I can't really speak to that. But I suppose if like that were like my compass for whether or not to like make music or anything else, like it might stun me into submission, I guess. But luckily, I just don't think about it like that.
I want to go back to the talk about revision, because for me, the most valuable part of the revision process is distance, both temporal and spatial. So,
Yeah.
for example, I never write and revise in the same chair. If I write here, I revise in that chair behind me. But the temporal distance, because I'm very big on separating those parts. Like I'm very big on separating what we call in fancy rhetorical terms the invention process from the writing process, right? I've got to separate those things. So there's the spatial distance, but also I noticed this about myself, temporal distance. So if I finish something in the morning and look at it later that same day, I'm still too close to it. I can't, I feel like, oh, I wrote that. How am I getting rid of it? But what I noticed is that I finished something at night and wake up the next morning, the simple act of sleep, I'm like a new person. And I'll typically wake up the next day revolted by what I wrote, but I'm able to cut stuff so easily that if it was the same day, it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd love to hear your take on maybe that part of the process for you, if that works for you.
Yeah. I think I've experienced that in, varying degrees. There are times when music has been very immediate and it's just like happens there as like an event, like here it is, like we made this thing and like we don't really decide whether or not we like it or spend time with it. It just kind of happens. And then there are other times like right now, like we're making a new album right now, and so we write songs and then we live with them for months, before even playing them live for people. It used to be that like we'd come up with a new song or something, and then immediately we'd start playing it. And there's just different types of feedback you get. There's different types of feelings that it makes you feel. Um, and I don't know, like I do think there is value though, like in like as you said, in being able to sort of take a step away and like look at it from a new set of through a new pair of eyes and make revisions to it that way. We've done it all different ways, to be honest. Um I do think that the music that we're working on right now is going to benefit from like having a little bit of time for us to like live with it and understand what it is and what we're trying to do with it. And I think the best versions of what that are going to be will be a result of that process.
So you deliberately, it sounds like that distance is now deliberate.
Yeah, we have more time now than we
Yeah.
used to. We used to be on a much crazier schedule by necessity. We were just younger and kind of at the whim of like, oh well, this opportunity touring over here with this band and opening up for this artist and playing our own shows, and we were kind of trying to balance all that. And to an extent, I guess, we still have those same, pressures, but now it's much more of like, we play our own headline concerts and tours all over the world, and we just kind of decide when we want to do things, and we have a lot more control over that process than we used to, or at least it felt like at the time.
Let's talk about that time element, because I find that probably the most effective way. So, okay, so we have 4 kids, and I find that having kids has made me much more disciplined, because when you have all the time in the world, you never get stuff done. But if I've got an hour, I mean, our kids, are older now, but if I've got an hour, between doing things with the kids, or the kids were taking naps, that hour was full of productivity. So I'm curious, do you, and I guess I would do that also as a writer by creating a false deadline for myself. So I would say, like, if my wife and I are going out in an hour, I would get more done in that hour because I know I had to stop. So I write well under deadlines, whether that's parental or non-parental. I'm curious how effective that is for you as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I have 4 kids as well, and they're young, 7-year-old twins going all the way down to a 6-month-old baby boy. And
So you're into it.
I've got my whole world is just like absolutely insane. And there really is no method to the madness of how the writing process and that creative process works. It's kind of like I fit it in where I can. All of my personal spaces where I, would make music before, um, they're all gone now. So I just like, it just kind of happens. Like music just kind of happens. And we get together as a band, and the dynamics in the band are different, and the guys in the bands have kids too, and um it just changes over time. It's just evolution.
But if
And
I said to you, you've got an hour, but there's no need to stop after that hour, for me at least, I'm not going to get as much done as if you said to me, the baby's going to be up in an hour. Here's your time. Don't you feel like has that made you more productive
I
with those
mean,
narrow time frames?
honestly, like half the time I'm like, I just want to go to sleep. Like it's so insane around here. I like I'm just even fighting for like a personal moment of like peace and sanity. So like you throw the art piece into it, and it's like writing music and like what it's like, okay, if that happens and it just like I'm in a headspace for it, and there happens to be an instrument lying around, and like great, but it's getting continually more and more challenging to like really carve out the time and find the right time to quiet down enough to write. But it still happens, and I guess I just, implicitly kind of just trust the process no matter what it's going to be, and I just go along with it. And it seems to be working. Here we are like 30 something years later, and people seem to still be paying attention and caring about what we're doing. So, I'm still very humbled and honored at that proposition.
Yeah. All right. So I want to talk about the role of movement to the process. And Agatha Christie, I always quote Agatha Christie this in these interviews because she said the best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes. So what she means by that is the ideas, the inspiration comes to us. And there was an article in the Washington Post a year ago about why we get our best ideas in the shower.
Yeah.
Because when our brains are engaged in an unconscious activity that requires no thought, that's when the ideas bubble up. So I've heard things like gardening, vacuuming, folding laundry, doing dishes, cleaning. I heard Swiffering last week. That's when the song ideas come to us. They don't come to us when we're thinking about them. They come to us when we're not thinking about them or when we're bored. So how often has that happened to you, if it does?
Um, it's happened to me a lot while I'm doing other things that are not music related. A lot of times when I'm just like driving someplace and not even listening to music. Maybe it's like a natural sound that I'm hearing outside, like the rhythmic like um sounds of like some kind of construction site or something. Like it could literally be anything. Um, it just changes, and that's the beauty of the process. That's the beauty of music and beauty of art is just being inspired by um anything in the world, from like meeting new people that are really interesting to traveling to a new place to just be sitting in an environment that's totally foreign and feels really uncomfortable. Um, I wrote music one time, like, after I, broke my back in a car accident. I was in an MRI machine for like an hour, and like the sounds that it was making were like some of the craziest sounds I'd ever heard at that time. I was a lot younger. I was like 15 when that happened, but it was like all I was thinking about was music during that time, and it's like that's just where my mind naturally goes. So I'm kind of always there in some form or another, but I wish I could tell you there's more structure to it, but it's kind of random actually.
But I love those. I've heard. I last week I interviewed an artist who said that the sound that hybrid cars make was inspiring. But I've heard car alarms, turn signals. Um, Someone told me once going over covered bridges, the thump, 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 thump. Um, but I've never heard construction. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, but I can see that though. But how about, and he's a horrible person to be clear, but Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, had this article in the Wall Street Journal where he says we get our best idea. Boredom is the best place when we're bored. And I think that goes along with that idea that when your brains are doing something that requires no thought.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really believe in boredom.
Hmm.
Like I don't get bored ever. Like my brain is always thinking about stuff. Like there's rarely ever a time when I'm like, "Oh, I'm so bored right now." Like I mean, I hear people say that and obviously that's their experience of the world. No, I'm not here to knock anybody's experience of the world, but um the world is far too not boring of a place. Like, I've spent a lot of my time in energy over the years, like kind of deeply delving into you know, uh physics, history of physics,
Right.
mathematical principles underlying physics. And it's like and even with just music in general anyway, like music's enough to work with. Like, how could you ever be bored? Like it's just like there's just the world is so fucking weird and like so strange and like like this like kind of mathematical reductionist approach to like trying to decode the universe seems like maybe to some to be like a fool's errand. Like it's like somehow like less interesting that way, and like to me it's like infinitely more interesting that way because it's so there are aspects of it that are so esoteric that are like, I don't mean that in like a woo-woo kind of bullshit sort of way. Like it's like, like if you and I try to build a house together, like we'd have to be able to agree on like what our measurements are. Like what are we measuring? Like is this 2 feet or 3 feet or how many? It depends on what our systems of distances and scales and measures are, right? Like everybody lives around different parts of the world, but like that's one of the interesting things to me is like how do we measure stuff, and in physics there's a something called the measurement problem, and it's like one of the weirder things that um one can delve into, and it's like I don't know, I can't imagine myself getting bored ever. If there's ever a time when I guess maybe I start feeling bored, like there are plenty of things to keep me from getting bored.
I've never interviewed anyone who feels that whose mind is working, all the time on all those different things.
I
And
can't help it. It's
yeah,
not
it's
like
amazing.
it's not something to brag about. It's not something to be like, oh, my brain is just firing on all cylinders all the time. It's like, it's honestly like something like I can't, it's like ADHD. It's like, I can't stop,
Yeah.
call it whatever it is.
So what about the role of movement? Because I find that I mean there's two kinds of movement. There's, I hear obviously, people always tell me when they're driving around they get great ideas, but also self-locomotion. And I wrote about this in the Washington Post about 5 years ago. I'm a big runner, and the impact that aerobic exercise has on creativity. And there's two ways to go with that, but I'd love to explore that with you if that happens. With both of those, I've got this David Byrne quote up here. He says, "A car is a good place to write lyrics. Driving occupies one part of the brain, freeing up the other." But there's also, like I said, the aerobic exercise that has that immediate benefit. So I'd love to explore that with you too.
Yeah, I'm also a runner. I love running. It's like it's funny though, running occupies kind of a different place in my life. Um, like sort of apart from music making. I tend to when I'm running, I tend to like go off into these like just thought spaces that really like, and I'm sure they contribute to music in some way or another, but I'm like listening to podcasts, or I'm like you know I listen to albums over and over and over and over again, like the same ones, like just out of habit, or like I'm not quite sure what it is. Probably make you laugh if you knew what I was listening to. Um, while I'm running, like 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Trying for whatever reason. Like I just enjoy it, like I guess part of like what makes 50 Cent so amazing is like there's this kind of invincibility that like, you know, in that age of hip hop, it's like, and I think it's probably still the same today, although I'm not as knowledgeable about, like the current state of hip hop. But running is like, you're trying to overcome a challenge, right? Like you're tired, or like you're trying to reach a distance, or trying to, beat a prior time or whatever. And it's like whatever kind of motivates me to do that, I kind of just go into it. But again, it's not something that I do really consciously. Like I just sort of like I just go there, and my brain just goes there. And I vacillate back and forth between listening to like I'll be listening to like, you know, Lil Wayne and like Slayer. Like I'm just a total fucking weirdo. I always have been. And ever since I was in high school, um, like my friends, even band members, members of my band would get in my car, and like we'd put like, something, we'd listen to cassettes, and I'd listen to certain songs, and I'd even just listen to pieces of them and pull out another one and put another one in, and it would drive everybody crazy because I'd only listen to like 30 seconds worth of music at a time. And yeah, I'm just weird.
Yeah, so I'll give you a 30-second a summary of that research because you're a science guy. You'd appreciate this. So, and again, I wrote about this as someone who's a runner. I was curious about this. So, there's a chemical in the brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor that gets secreted through increased blood flow, which is exercise. So what they've done in the lab is put these people on treadmills for 20 minutes at 60% max heart rate, which is not much more than a moderate walk. And after those 20 minutes, administer tests that measure executive function.
Yep.
And those people always score higher than people who didn't exercise. And that benefit lasts for about 90 minutes post-exercise. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, it's interesting stuff. And so they found that the sweet spot is 30 minutes at 60%. And it's not dose responsive. So 60 minutes isn't twice as good as 30, and 90% isn't better than 60. But that's why when we come back from running, we tend to be energized creatively. And, I use it when I'm in a rut. I use it when I know that I'm going to be doing something that's a long project, but the research behind that is fascinating. The key is, the one caveat is that it has to be exercise that doesn't involve executive function. So if you're running in downtown New York, that effect is wiped out as opposed to running in nature. Uh,
I run on a track.
yeah, see, and that's perfect because there's no
That's the
thought
reason
involved.
why. That's the
Yeah,
exact reason why is I don't, when I start running, I don't like having to even think about like where I'm turning or
yep,
who's in my way, or I mean obviously you have a little bit of that, but when you get on a track, it's like um like you just keep track of your times, and it's like you're a superconductor. You
yeah.
go for as long as you can go, and and hopefully nothing gets in your way.
Yeah. And they found that people who, if they're playing Wii Fit as they're exercising, that effect gets wiped out because you're using executive function as as you're
Yeah, I
exercising.
don't I don't like to engage like in like, and this isn't like a conscious thing. It's just something I do. I just tend not to like get into like thought processes about certain things while I'm running. I'll listen to like a podcast or something that's interesting, I guess, that could be thought provoking, but that my engagement in that is like minimal compared to like when I'm writing music or like writing down new ideas.
Since you mentioned writing down, are you a pen and paper person or a computer person?
I'm both. It depends what's around me. If there's a paper and a pen around me, I'll scribble a bunch of stuff that nobody can understand except me. And if there's a phone or a laptop or something, like I'm happy to jot that stuff down too. I love technology. I'll be the first to say it. It's like, when digital recording became a thing in the mid 90s, late 90s, like I really embraced it. There were a lot of people in my world that were like very like, oh, this is gonna screw everything up. And it's like, yeah, the camera screwed up the artist, right? Like it's just like this is how this is not even technology, it's just evolution and
Yeah.
progress. Like we just change over time. And the thing that came before is not going to be the same thing as the thing that came after. And the technology influences the music making. And look at, like, there's just been incredible, incredible music made, like due to advancements in technology. Like some of the most interesting stuff. Like, some of my good friend is Skrillex. He's like always making the craziest shit, and I totally admire him for it. Like I watch what he does, and it's like a kid playing video games, but like writing really interesting, like savant type level, music, and I just love being around that.
The pen and paper thing, I know they've done research with actually students in law school and found that students who take notes with pen and paper have greater recall than those who take notes on computer. I had Daniel Lanois, the producer, on, and he said he does all of his ideas and lyrics on 11 by 22 art paper. So there's arrows and thought bubbles and scribbles everywhere
But he
because
didn't grow up with an iPad. You know what I
that's
mean?
true. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like the younger generation is like they're being influenced by technology in ways that, like, and I'm kind of like in between,
Yeah.
like we didn't have social media so much when I was younger, but like it started happening later. I went to college during a period of time when like that was like exploding. And it's just like you can always rely on the young people to find new ways to use new tools that become available to them. And I feel like if you're an older person, like, you know, great. If you're an older person and you have a way that you like to do things, like just do it. That's wonderful. But to like deny, and it's always a thing where like the older generations like, oh, these young kids, like, it's all such bullshit. It's just a fad, like whatever. Like we shouldn't be, like history teaches us like we shouldn't be ignorant about that. Like they're gonna come up with new art forms that we're not thinking of, like completely new art forms, and those art forms we might not even recognize, and it's like that's just the way of the world.
I will tell you this, though. I interview songwriters all the time in their 20s, and they're mostly using pen and paper. That's the
Yeah,
funny
I
thing.
mean,
Yeah.
it's good, and it's good that they're using pen and paper, and then there are going to be plenty of artists that are going to emerge that are going to leverage AI. And it's like, I hear so much like negative feedback from like the artist community about AI, and it's like it's like hating the internet, it's like the internet was really slow in 1995, but it's fast now,
Yeah.
and it can be leveraged into different things, and the music business was so stupid to not leverage it and try and like make it go away. So I kind of feel the same way about AI. It's kind of like, yeah, we should put guardrails on things that are dangerous. There are implications that are scary, but at the same time, like it's like the internet, like it's going to change the way that fundamentally people do everything. And that pen and paper, like that may become a relic of the past and a nostalgic like form of art that binds us to a specific temporal period. And like that's it. The world's going to change into a new thing, and whatever that new thing is might not involve pen and paper, but it might. We just don't know.
All right. Last question. Ernest Hemingway famously said all artists should go to art galleries, all writers, sorry, should go to art galleries to get inspired. I read every day. If I don't, I get crazy. I get very anxious, more so than if I don't write. If I don't read, that's what makes me anxious. So I'd love to wrap this up, talk about how much you get to read, if you're a genre person or an author person, who are some of your favorite writers?
Yeah, like I mean I can relate to what you're saying about being in art galleries and staying up, reading books and the like. Um I I just go and I just go wherever my curiosity leads me, and it's like it can maybe if someone were to sort of interpret the patterning that I've, taken over the years, there might be like really distinct patterns that stick out. But like I love biology. I love biology and pharmacology and understanding, you know, what we don't understand about the world. There's so much so much mystery, so much interesting, like just learning simple things about how, or things that seem like they're simple, um are not simple, and we only see a little slice of the world. This is a fact. Like we have a narrow bandwidth of light waves that our eyes can see. There's a much bigger spectrum of light and radiative energy in the universe, and we're just starting to like uncover little bits and pieces of like what this weird simulation, if I could call it that, we live in. It really is like there's a lot going on, a lot more going on than like just what we see and experience. So I love kind of delving into that. I love thinking about it. It's kind of an endless well of infinite like inspiration, interesting ideas, interesting thoughts, um, and scary as hell at the same time.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget my book, Desolation, a heavy metal memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, comes out June 25th on Hachette Books. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is one of the guitarists in the band Lamb of God, and This is his memoir. It's a damn good book, if I do say so myself. But again, that book is out June 25th on Hachette Books. You can pre-order it now everywhere, your favorite online bookstore. So be sure to do that. The site, Songwriters on Podcast, contains all of the archived episodes of the podcast. Of course, you can find them on all streaming platforms as well, but they're also on the site. I only have had the podcast for about, I don't think even 2 years. Before that, all of the interviews were transcribed, and that took a lot of work. And that's why I started the podcast. So if you want to read the interviews that I did before the podcast, they are on Songwriters on Podcast as well. There are about 200 of them going back to 2010. So check those out. If you want to get a hold of me, ben@songwritersonprocess.com, or fill out a form on the website. I'm here for your questions, your complaints, your concerns, or your interview suggestions. I'd love getting those as well. So hit me up. I will try to respond. So that's it, everyone. Have a great day and see you next time.